What if Atlantis was never underwater? What if the most famous lost city in human history has been visible from space this whole time? A 25-mile wide bullseye carved into the Sahara Desert, matching Plato's description with disturbing precision. When the world's richest man started sharing posts about this structure, mainstream archaeology dismissed it as internet nonsense. But here's what they can't explain. The measurements match, the location matches, the timeline matches, and a Greek historian documented a people called the Atlantes living in this exact region, a full century before Plato ever wrote the word Atlantis. How did a philosopher in ancient Athens describe a ringed city that aligns with a formation he never could have seen? Why does the date he gave, 9600 BCE, coincide with a real climate catastrophe? Coincidence? Or has the truth been hiding in plain sight? Let's investigate. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Elon Musk didn't hold a press conference about Atlantis. There's no official SpaceX statement declaring they found the lost city. What we have is something more subtle and in some ways more significant. Over the past few years, Musk has developed a pattern of engagement with alternative history content. There was the infamous tweet claiming aliens built the pyramids, later clarified as a joke, but not before millions took notice. There have been retweets of content about the Richat Structure, and there have been multiple appearances on Joe Rogan's podcast, where researcher Jimmy Corsetti has extensively discussed the theory that this Saharan formation is actually Atlantis. Now, why would a man building rockets to Mars care about a 12,000-year-old legend? The answer lies in Musk's worldview. He's spoken repeatedly about his belief that civilizations move in cycles. The Sumerians rose and fell. The Babylonians rose and fell. The Romans achieved technological heights that weren't matched again for 1,000 years, and then they collapsed. Musk sees history not as a straight line upward, but as a series of peaks and valleys. And he's terrified we might be approaching another valley. This is why he wants humanity to become multiplanetary. It's not just ambition, it's insurance against extinction. In this context, Atlantis isn't just a myth, it's a data point. If an advanced civilization really was wiped out overnight by some catastrophe, it validates everything Musk fears about our own fragility. The Richat hypothesis isn't ancient history to him, it's a warning. So what exactly is this structure that's captured such attention? The Richat Structure, nicknamed the Eye of the Sahara, sits on the Adrar Plateau in Mauritania, West Africa. It's approximately 40 kilometers in diameter, visible from orbit, and astronauts have used it as a landmark for decades. From above, it looks like a giant target, concentric rings of alternating ridges and valleys, spiraling inward toward a chaotic center. The official explanation? It's a geological dome, an anticline, formed around 100 million years ago and eroded over time. Natural processes, case closed. But that explanation, while geologically sound, doesn't address the uncomfortable coincidences. And those coincidences are what keep researchers and billionaires asking questions. Before we build any case for ancient mysteries, let's give mainstream science its due. The geological explanation for the Richat Structure is well documented, peer-reviewed, and supported by decades of fieldwork. Here's what happened, according to geologists. Approximately 100 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth, magma pushed upward from deep within the planet's crust. This created a dome, like a blister forming beneath the skin of the Earth. But critically, the magma never broke through to the surface. It wasn't a volcano. Instead, it cooled and solidified underground, pushing up the sedimentary layers above it. Then came erosion. Over tens of millions of years, wind and water went to work on this dome. And here's where the rings come from. Different rock layers have different hardnesses. Quartzite is hard. It resists erosion and stands as ridges. Limestone is softer. It wears away into valleys. As the dome eroded from the top down, these alternating layers were exposed, creating the concentric ring pattern we see today. The evidence supporting this is substantial. At the center of the structure, geologists have found igneous rocks: rhyolite, gabbro, carbonatite, even kimberlite. These are rocks formed from cooled magma, exactly what you'd expect from this formation process. There are also hydrothermal features indicating that hot water once circulated through fractured rock, dissolving minerals and creating the breccia zones found today. And here's the crucial point. These rings aren't shallow channels that could have been dug. They extend deep into the earth. The layers are continuous with the surrounding plateau. The scale is geological, not architectural. To carve this artificially, you'd need to excavate cubic kilometers of solid rock, far beyond any ancient capability, and frankly, beyond our modern capability too. So the geology is settled. The Richat structure is a natural formation. But here's what geologists don't address, because it's not their job. They study rocks, not myths. The question of whether ancient peoples knew about this structure, whether they revered it, whether stories about it traveled across the ancient world, that's a different question entirely. The geology is settled. The mystery isn't. Because when you actually read what Plato wrote, something strange emerges. Most people know Atlantis from movies, video games, maybe a documentary or two. Very few have actually sat down and read Plato's original texts, the dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. When you do, you notice something unexpected. Plato wasn't vague. He was specific, uncomfortably specific. He describes Atlantis as a city of concentric rings, alternating bands of water and land surrounding a central island, and he gives measurements. Plato uses a unit called the stadion, plural stadia, which converts to roughly 185 meters. According to his account, the central island of Atlantis was 5 stadia in diameter, about 925 meters across. The first ring of water surrounding it was 1 stadion wide. The first ring of land was 2 stadia wide. This pattern continued outward, with the rings growing progressively larger. When you do the math, the total diameter of the city, from one outer wall to the other, comes to approximately 127 stadia. That's about 23.5 kilometers. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Richat structure's total diameter is approximately 40 kilometers. Larger than Plato's city, yes, but the inner ring structures, when measured carefully, fall within the range of his stadia calculations. The visual pattern is undeniable. Concentric circles, alternating in elevation, spiraling inward. Seen from above, it looks remarkably like the city Plato described. But we have to be honest about the problems too. Plato's central island was supposed to be small, less than a kilometer across, containing temples and palaces. The center of the Richat structure is a chaotic breccia zone several kilometers wide. That doesn't match. Plato described Atlantis as surrounded by a vast rectangular plain, ringed by mountains opening to the sea. The Richat structure sits on a plateau, 400 meters above sea level, 500 kilometers inland from the Atlantic Ocean. That doesn't match either. These are significant discrepancies. They should give anyone pause. But they don't erase the central question. How did a philosopher in Athens, who never traveled to West Africa, who had no access to satellite imagery, describe a ringed structure with dimensions that align, even roughly, with something real in the Sahara? Was he inventing details from pure imagination? Or was he working from information that came from somewhere? To answer that, we need to look at what Greeks knew about this region before Plato ever picked up his stylus. Here's something most Atlantis documentaries skip entirely, and it might be the most important piece of the puzzle. Plato wasn't the first Greek to write about Atlas or connect that name to the western edge of the world. A full century before Plato composed his dialogues, another Greek historian documented something remarkable. His name was Herodotus. He's often called the father of history, the first person we know of who systematically traveled, interviewed witnesses, and recorded what he learned about the world. Around 440 BCE, he completed his great work, the Histories. In Book 4, describing the peoples of North Africa moving westward from Egypt, Herodotus mentions a people he calls the Atlantes. They live, he says, near a mountain called Atlas, a peak so high that its summit is never visible, always shrouded in cloud. The locals call it the Pillar of Heaven. He places these Atlantes in the far western desert, beyond the known world, in a region that, when modern scholars reconstruct his geography, corresponds roughly to western Mauritania or Algeria, the same region where the Richat Structure sits. Think about what this means. The name Atlas and its association with Northwest Africa existed in Greek knowledge 100 years before Plato wrote about Atlantis. Plato didn't invent the geographical connection, he inherited it. The tradition of a people called Atlantes living at the western edge of the earth was already established when he sat down to write his allegory. This raises an obvious question. Where did the Greeks get this information? They weren't explorers of the Atlantic. They didn't have colonies in West Africa. So how did they know about a mountain called Atlas and a people called Atlantes in that precise location? The answer is that someone else told them, someone who had actually been there. The Phoenicians. Based in what is now Lebanon, the Phoenicians were the master sailors of the ancient world. From roughly 1500 to 300 BCE, they dominated Mediterranean trade. They reached Britain for tin. They circumnavigated Africa for the Egyptian pharaoh. And they were notoriously secretive about their routes, trade secrets that kept competitors at bay. But information leaks, stories travel, sailors talk in ports, and the Greeks were listening. The connection between Phoenician exploration and Greek mythology is well established, and it suggests a pathway by which knowledge of distant lands and strange formations within them could have reached philosophers in Athens. But there's another element that makes this hypothesis even more compelling: the date. Plato didn't just describe a place, he gave us a time. According to the Timaeus, the Egyptian priests told Solon that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before their conversation. Solon visited Egypt around 600 BCE. That places the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9,600 BCE. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as obvious exaggeration. No civilization could be that old, they argued. Writing wasn't invented until around 3,200 BCE. The number must be symbolic. Then, climate science revealed something that changed the conversation. The Younger Dryas was a period of dramatic, rapid climate change that occurred between approximately 12,900 and 11,700 years ago. It ended with sudden warming, massive ice sheet collapse, and catastrophic flooding as meltwater poured into the oceans. This event, sometimes called Meltwater Pulse 1b, caused sea levels to rise rapidly. The Younger Dryas ended around 9,700 to 9,600 BCE, the same date Plato gave for the destruction of Atlantis. But here's what makes this even more intriguing. During this period, and for several thousand years afterward, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was green. Climate scientists call this the African humid period, lasting roughly from 14,000 to 5,000 years ago. During this time, the Sahara was covered with lakes, rivers, grasslands, even forests in places. Rock art from this era shows hippos, crocodiles, elephants, and cattle herders. The region was not just habitable, it was thriving. The Richat Structure, during this period, would have existed in a wet, verdant landscape. Water may have filled some of those concentric valleys. It would have been a landmark in a living world, not a dead desert. And we know humans were there. The Richat Structure and its surrounding area contain abundant stone tools, specifically Acheulean hand axes and cleavers dating back as far as 1.7 million years. This proves continuous human presence over geological timescales. Now, to be clear, these are Paleolithic tools. They're evidence of hunter-gatherers, not city builders. No one has found walls, metallurgy, or harbor infrastructure at Richat. But consider this. Plato's date aligns with a real catastrophe. The region he points to was habitable when he claims Atlantis existed, and humans were definitely there. Is this all coincidence? Or did memories of a green Sahara and its eventual drying survive in oral tradition, traveling across millennia until a philosopher in Athens gave them form? The key to this mystery isn't buried in the sand, it's floating on the Mediterranean. To understand how information about Northwest Africa could have reached Plato, we need to understand the ancient networks of trade and exploration, and specifically, what Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors knew. The Phoenicians didn't just sail the Mediterranean, they ventured into the Atlantic. They established colonies along the North African coast and down into what is now Morocco. They were the first Mediterranean people to consistently travel beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, the ancient Pillars of Hercules. And then there's Hanno. Around 500 BCE, roughly 140 years before Plato wrote his dialogues, a Carthaginian explorer named Hanno led a fleet down the West African coast. His Periplus, or sailing log, survived in Greek translation. In it, he describes traveling past vast deserts, encountering indigenous peoples, and reaching a volcanic mountain so spectacular, he called it the Chariot of the Gods. Most scholars identify this as Mount Cameroon, the only active volcano on the West African coast. Hanno sailed past the region of modern Mauritania. His sailors would have seen the coast, and in an age when any remarkable feature was noted and discussed, they would have heard stories from local populations about what lay inland. The Richat Structure, visible from elevated positions, would have been known to the peoples of the region for millennia. Stories about the great eye in the plateau would have traveled along trade routes, passed from village to village, eventually reaching the ears of foreign sailors. Now, trace the path of information. Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors learn about a remarkable ringed formation in the western desert. They bring stories back to their ports. These stories spread to Egypt, a major trading partner. Egyptian priests, keepers of ancient knowledge, preserve these accounts. When Solon, the Athenian lawmaker, visits Egypt around 600 BCE, the priests share their accumulated wisdom with him. Solon brings the stories back to Greece, and eventually they reach Plato. This is exactly the transmission chain Plato himself claims in the Timaeus. The hypothesis, then, is this. The Richat Structure may not be Atlantis in any literal sense, but it may be the inspiration for Atlantis, a real place, strange and remarkable, whose existence filtered through centuries of storytelling until it became the seed of Plato's philosophical allegory. The Richat Structure may be the muse of Atlantis, if not its corpse. And that leads us to the deepest question of all. Let's step back and consider what we've established. Herodotus documented a people called Atlantes, living near a mountain called Atlas in northwest Africa, a full century before Plato wrote the word Atlantis. The geographical association existed in Greek knowledge before Plato's dialogues were composed. Plato describes a city of concentric rings with specific measurements that align, at least roughly, with a structure in that same region. A structure he never could have seen. The date Plato gives, 9600 BCE, coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of catastrophic climate change. And during that era, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was green, wet, and inhabited. Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors were actively exploring the West African coast, gathering information that flowed back through trade networks to Egypt and eventually to Greece. The geologists are right. The Richat Structure is a natural formation. It's 100 million years old. No ancient civilization carved those rings. But that doesn't mean ancient people didn't know about it. That doesn't mean it didn't inspire stories, legends, whispered accounts of a great eye in the western desert where the world ended and the unknown began. That doesn't mean Plato invented Atlantis from nothing. The eye of the Sahara has been staring up at the sky for eons. Sailors heard about it. Travelers marveled at it. And those whispers may have traveled thousands of miles, over centuries, transforming along the way, from geographical curiosity to legendary city to philosophical warning, until a philosopher in Athens gave them immortal form. Elon Musk looks at this structure and sees something familiar, a reminder that advanced civilizations are not guaranteed to survive, that catastrophe strikes without warning, that the desert may hold memories we've forgotten. Whether or not Atlantis was a literal city, the fear it represents is real. And the Sahara, that ocean of sand, may be hiding more truths than we've dared to seek. The Richat Structure isn't Atlantis, but the mystery of what ancient peoples knew and what we've lost remains wide open. The power of myths doesn't lie in their literal truth. It lies in what they reveal about us, our fears, our hopes, our fragmented memories of worlds that came before. Atlantis endures because it speaks to something deep in the human psyche, the knowledge that we are not the first civilization to rise on this planet, and perhaps not the last to fall. What else have we dismissed as just a myth that might be pointing towards something real? What other memories lie buried beneath sand, beneath water, beneath the comfortable certainties we've constructed? The eye of the Sahara sits silent in the desert, patient as stone. What do you think? Could ancient sailors have known about it? Could those stories have reached Plato? Let me know in the comments. If this made you think, hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries explored with open minds and honest questions.